Good evening. Today's daf is daf Samach Ches. We are going to begin Samach Vav Amud Beis by the Mishnah. Now, from here to the end of the Masechta, the Gemara is going to be dealing with the halachas of Yuchsin, which means genealogy. Now, what does that mean? When a child is born, when do we go after the father? When do we go after the mother? And very fascinating, relevant halachas. And let us begin. The Mishnah says that Kol Makim, Zog the Mishnah, Kol Makim sheish Kidushin ve'ein Aveda, any time that there is Kidushin and there's no Aveda, which means that the Kidushin is tefis to somebody, a man is Mekadosh to a woman, and there's no Aveda, there's nothing wrong with doing that. So the halacha is, Havlad Heilech Acher HaZacher. The Vlad, this child, goes after the male. In other words, goes after the father. Ve'e Zoi. Now, what's the case? So the Mishnah says, Zoi Kehenes Leviya V'Yisraelis. This is either a Bas Kohen, a Bas Levi, or a regular Jewish girl. She nisu the Kohen Levi V'Yisrael. Now she got married to a Kohen Levi V'Yisrael. So, and they had a child. So the status of the child is determined after the father. So if the father is a Kohen, the child is a Kohen. If the father is a Levi, the child's a Levi, even if the mother is a Bas Kohen. That's the klal number one in the Gemara. What is that? You could try it, yeah. Okay. Second klal is v'chol makom sheyesh Kidushin v'yesh Aveda. Now, anytime there is, the Kidushin is tefis, but there's an Aveda over there. So the halacha is Havlad Hoilech Achar HaPogum. So the Vlad, the child, goes after the Pogum. Ve'ezei, what is that case? Zay Almana, the Kohen Gadol. This is when an Almana marries a Kohen Gadol, which the halacha is, the Teda says that a Kohen cannot marry an Almana. So that a Kohen Gadol married an Almana, or a case of a Grusha v'Chalutza, somebody who's a divorcee, or a Chalutza, I married a Kohen Hedit, a regular Kohen, or a Mamzeres and a Sina Yisrael. A Mamzeres and a Sina married a Yid, which is also a Bas Yisrael and Mamzel and Nasin. So all of these, we go after who the Pogum is in this relationship. So since the Pogum in this relationship is none other than either, let's say, the Almana, or the Grusha Chalutza, or the Mamzeres and a Sina, or the Mamzel and Nasin, we go after always the Pogum. So in this case, who's the pogum? The mother. So the Vlad will go after the mother. That's klal number 2. Klal number 3, v'chol mi she'en le'alav Kidushin. Any time that there's no Kidushin, aval yesh lo alacherim Kidushin, but other people, the Kidushin is tefis, and the Mishnah will explain what that means. Havlad mamzer. The Vlad, the child will be a mamzer. Now, ve'ei zeh. What is that? This is if somebody has relations with one of his relatives, which is aroyis. Midiraisa, a person's chayiv karis, if he doesn't b'mezid, so there's no kiddushin, but other people can marry this girl. So too, if somebody has relations with that ish, that the baila has kiddushin, so the Vlad also will go after the mamzer. We'll go after the mamzer. Fourth klal, v'chol mi she'en lo yalav v'lo alacherim Kidushin, avlat k'meisa. When there's no Kidushin and there's no Isra at all, ve'ezeh, that is Vlad shivcha v'nochris, that is by a goy. There's no Kidushin by a goy, so therefore the child is, let's say, the Vlad will be a shivchas evid, and the child will be a goy. Those are the 4 dinim of the Mishnah. So now the Gemara says, now the Gemara says, Kol makom sheyesh Kidushin. The Mishnah says, any time that there's Kiddushin and ve'ein Aveda, there's no Aveda, so the halacha is Havlad Hoilech Acher HaZacher. The Vlad goes after the father. Now, Rav Shimon ben Lakish asks a shaila on this din. What's the question? Amar later Rav Shimon ben Lakish says, Klalahu, is this the klal? The Chol makom sheish Kiddushin ve'ein Aveda, that when there's Kiddushin, and there's no Aveda in regards to Kiddushin. Havlad Heilech Achar Zachar, you're telling me that the Vlad goes after the Zachar? goes after the father. But he says, I'm going to ask you a shayla. What's the shayla? He said like this: Ger shenas mamzeres. If a ger marries a mamzeres, which the yesh Kidushin ain't aveda. Over there is Kidushin and there's no aveda because a ger is mutter to marry a mamzeres. So the halacha is havlad heilech achar hapogum. The vlad goes after the mamzeres, the pogum. The Tanya ger shenas mamzeres havlad mamzer divided b'yesi. So what do we see from here? We see that the vlad becomes the status of a mamzer like the mother. Now, according to the Mishnah says when there's sheyesh Kidushin ve'ein aveda, when there's Kidushin there's no aveda. Havlad heilech achar hazachar. So if that's really true, in the case of a ger that married a mamzeres, it should be kosher. Why? Because the vlad should be kosher. Because we have this klal. The klal said that, right? That was the first din in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that kol makom sheish Kidushin ve'ein aveda havlad heilech achar hazachar, which means it's a klal. Havlad heilech achar hazachar. But I see over here where there is Kidushin, there's no aveda, because a ger can marry mamzeres, and nevertheless, what do I see? I see that it goes after the mother. So Amalei, so Rebbeim tells Rav Shimon Lakish, mi savris mastis in the. Do you think our Mishnah that says? Do you think our Mishnah is the Rabbi S who holds that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres? Masnisen Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah is Kishitas Rabbi Yehuda, who argues on Rabbi S. The Amar, we learned in our Brisa. Ger la yisa mamzeres. A ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. V'yesh Kidushin, v'yesh aveda. So, like this, a ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. So, if they do get married, it comes out that they married by aveda, and there is Kidushin, and if there's a Kidushin or an aveda, v'yesh aveda, havlad heilech achar pogum. So, therefore, according to this opinion, he'll hold that the vlad will be like the mother. So our Mishnah is not Rabbi Yasi. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda that holds that a ger lo yisim mamzeres, and it comes out that the vlad over here will go after the pogum, and therefore the vlad will go after the mother because it's a pogum over here. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, Vinisniya. So the question is, why did the Mishnah include this? Why didn't the Mishnah include the case of a ger that married a mamzeres, that the vlad goes after the pogum? With the other dugmas, we brought the second case that when there's Kidushin is teifis, but they're ever alav, so the halacha is that the vlad heilech achar pogum. For the Gemara, why didn't the Gemara bring this case that there's Kidushin and Aveda? Why didn't the Mishnah mention it? So the Gemara answers and says that the reason why the Mishnah didn't mention it is Tana kol makim b'sefer l'asui. The Tana taught this klal, the second klal, in the sefer of the Mishnah. What did it say? Kol makim. Now kol makim is mashma to include other cases that were not mentioned in the Mishnah. Which what does kol makim come to teach me? That to include the case of a ger that married a mamzeres. Anybody say a second answer? Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yasi, who holds that a ger is allowed to marry mamzeres. So it comes out that there is Kiddushin and there's not an Aveda, and nevertheless, the Vlad goes after the Pokum. The Tana Ezo, the Uti. And the reason why the Tana taught Ezo is to tell me that when she's a Kehenes, a Levi Yisraelis, that marries a Kohen Levi Yisrael, that only in these cases the Vlad goes after the Zachar. But in other cases, like even if there is Kiddushin and no Aveda, the Vlad does not go after the father. Rather, it goes after the Pogum. And when the Mishnah says Kol Makim, it's not telling me every place, but rather it's telling me that only in these specific cases do we go after the Zachar, but not. So again, we have two answers. Answer number one is our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that it's a Pogum here. Answer number two is that the Mishnah is really Rabbi Yasi, and that a ger can marry mamzera. So why does it go after the pogum? Is because the Mishnah is telling us that after these cases, but not the other cases. Now, you're telling me that after these cases, the vlad goes after the zocher, but no more. V'harei, but we know a chalul. A kohen was a chalul, which means that the parents should not have gotten married, and they ended up getting married. So the kohen now, this child is a chalul. So this chalul, shenasa bas Yisrael, a chalul who marries a regular Jewish girl, the yesh Kidushin, there is Kidushin over there, ve'ein aveda. There's no aveda. Why? Because Bnei Yisrael are allowed to marry chalalim. And what's the din over there? V'havlad heilech achar zocher. And if they're going to have a daughter, so what's the din? The daughter has the status of a chalala like the father, and she's not allowed to marry the kohen. So what do we see from here? So we're saying Ezo is dafke. There's other cases that the vlad goes after the zocher. We see in this case when a chalul marries a bas Yisrael, there's Kidushin and there's no aveda. And who does the child go after? The child goes after the father. So you're saying dafka in these cases, but I see another case that we also go after the father. So you can't say that's what the Mishnah says. Ezu is to be only these and to be ma'at the rest. So the Gemara says holei kasha. That's not a shayla. Why? Because you could say that the Tana of the Mishnah is Kidushin ben Rabbi Yehuda. That he holds like Kidushin ben Rabbi Yehuda. That according to Kidushin, he says that this girl is a chalul. This girl who's a chalul, bas Yisrael, is kosher to marry kahuna, and the vlad does not go after the zocher in such a case. Now, the Gemara brings another case that we find that the vlad goes after the zocher. Now, the Gemara says, "V'hari Yisrael shenosa chalala." A yid who marries a bas kohen who's a chalala, the yesh Kidushin ve'ein avera. There's Kidushin, there's no avera. Why? Because we know a chalala is not usher to the kohenim, only to Yisraelim. Sorry, the chalala is also only to the kohenim, not to Yisraelim. So chalala who marries a Yisrael, which that din is havlad heilech achar zacher. Over there, the vlad goes after the zacher, and we don't say that she's a chalala, the pogum shneim. Rather, she has the din of her father, which is kosher. So the chayda, how can you say Eza means dafke these, but not any other cases? I find you a case that we go after the father. So the Gemara answers and says, Tana kol makim d'reish lasuye. When the Tana was maramis by saying that we go after the zacher in the reisha, when he uses the expression kol makim, it's mashma that he's being marba other cases. To tell me that a Yisrael that marries a chalala, that the vlad also we go after the zacher. So say it clearly, it's listed in the dugmois. So the answer is mishum d'lei masni misni la. You can't teach it. Why? How is the Tana going to teach it? What are you going to say? Kehanes olivia Yisraelis v'chalala shenisus l'kein levi Yisrael v'chalala l'kein michazi. You can't include that in the same case because a kohen is not ready to marry. A chalala is not allowed to marry a kohen. It's usher. So if it would teach us that it's mashma that it would be mutter. So therefore, in order not to think that it's mutter, the Tana has to be marich in lashon chalala levi Yisrael by itself, and that's why we use the lashon of kol makim. Okay, so now the Gemara goes to ask more questions. Well, ika, but you have other cases that there is Kidushin and there's not aveda. Where there is Kidushin, there's no aveda, and the vlad goes after. We know the halacha of Rabbi Barchana, the Amar Rabbi Barchana, Rabbi Yechanan, mitzri sheni. If you have, let's say, somebody who's a second generation, the father converted, he was a mitzri, he converted. So the father is deir rishon. The child is a deir sheni. He's a son of a ger, and we call that deir sheni mitzri. What did this deir sheni mitzri do? Nasa mitzri shena. He married a girl who herself converted to Judaism. So, they're allowed to get married. So, what's the status of this child? Do we go after the father or do we go after the mother? So, the halacha is bina shlishis heve. The child is a third, a mitzri shlishi, which a mitzri shlishi is allowed to marry a yid, as the Torah says, der shlishi yavi lahem b'kal Hashem. Now, why is the status? Why is the child a der shlishi? Because the father is a der sheni. So I see that we go after the father, not after the mother. So you're saying Ezo is dafke. It's not necessarily correct because in this case, I see that in the Deir Sheni, which marries a Deir Rishon, the child is a Deir Shlishi. So the Gemara answers and says, Tana kol makim d'reish l'asui. When the Tana says kol makim, it's coming to be married by this case of mitzvah sheni that married a mitzvah d'shena. According to the Dimi, who says in the Gemara in Yevamis, Tafayin Chesam Aleph, who says that a mitzvah sheni that marries a mitzvah shena, so the child is a sheni. It's a sheni hevet. We go after the father, and the halacha is that a bas Yisrael cannot marry this child because we go after the mother. The mother is a der rishena, mitzvah rishena. So therefore, the child is a mitzvah sheni. So Tana Ezu Lemutei. So he says that you could say Ezeh is to be mamayit. That dafka in these cases we go after the zachar, but in other cases, even that there is Kidushin and Nam Naveda, we go after the even though there is Kidushin and Nam Naveda, we go after the mother. Okay, so now the Gemara goes on the klal that when there's a Kidushin and there's no Aveda, we go after the Zachar dafka in these cases. In these three cases. We have a case that when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, the Bavel Omar Rabbi Yechanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. But Umais, when it comes to Goyim, if a Goy, one Goy marries another Goy, but one Goy is from one nation and the other Goy is from another nation. So who do you go after? Guys, if you have one Goy, let's say, is from the nation of Mitzrayim, who marries somebody, let's say, from Syria, two Goyim, and now they have a child. Is the child an Egyptian or is the child somebody from Syria? So that's the question over here. So what's the din? Halach achar zachar. We go after the father. Now, nizgairu, if they become gedim and then they get married, so halach achar pogam shebishneim, we go after the pogam. Now, even though there's gedim, which there's Kidushin, there's no Aveda, what do we say? Halach achar pogam, and not after the zachar, and not like the Mishnah says that we go after the zachar. So the Gemara says, Tana Ezel Amuti Dafka in these cases. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back to the same we said before. We said that our Mishnah is a Kabesi who holds that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. So it comes out that there is Kiddushin and there's no Aveda. Nevertheless, even though there's Kiddushin, no Aveda, nevertheless we go after the pogam. In other words, the ger shenas mamzeres, the child is a mamzer. The child is a mamzer, and we don't go after the father. And the Mishnah is memayit ezu to tell me the klal that we go after the zachar only in these cases. So now the Gemara asks, "Hi, mai, what's going on there? How could you say that? If you say like the first answer that the Mishnah is kishitas Rabbi Yehuda, that a ger is also to marry mamzeres, so therefore comes out that the vlad of a ger mamzeres we go after the pogam, like the din of yesh kiddushin v'yesh aveda. So now we can understand kol makom d'reisha. So when we say kol makom of the reisha la'asuye, so it's coming to include that even though we go after the zachar, nevertheless, when there's kiddushin and no aveda, nevertheless, Yisrael shenas halala, a case of a Yisrael that married a halala, that the child is kosher, udraba barbrachana, and the case of a mitzvah sheni that married a mitzvah shena, that we say that the child is a mitzvah shlishi, ezel l'muti. So what is ezel coming to be mayit? The Reb Dimi, which he holds that the mitzvah sheni that married a mitzvah shena, the child is a mitzvah sheni, because we go after the pogum, we're Ravin, and like Ravin. That kol makim the seifa. When we say any case of the seifa, la'asuye ger shenas mamzeres comes to include the case of a ger that married mamzeres. So now, if you say that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yesi, kol makim the reisha kedam marin, ezo kedam marin, but kol makim the seifa, but the kol makim the seifa la'asuye, what's it coming to add? So the Gemara says, "L'tai meich," and according to your reasoning, I have the same shaila. Rabbi Yehuda ezo the seifa lamali. What's coming ezo the seifa? Ella rather, aditana reisha ezo, tana seifa ezo. The reisha taught ezo, so you're also teaching ezo. Hachanami aditana reisha kol makim, tananami seifa kol makim. Gufa. Now the Gemara is going to discuss the text itself. What had happened over here? What does that mean? When it comes to goyim, halach achar zachar, we go after who? The zachar. Is gairu if they get engaged, if they converted before marriage, That we go after the flawed one in the yuchsin. Now, the Gemara analyzes, what does it mean with regard to the nation? We follow the male. The time we learned it in Bryson. From where do we know that somebody from the Goyim that came on a Kananis and had a child that you're allowed to purchase this slave, and he's not considered as a member of the Kananim, or not allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael? After the pasuk says, the Torah says, and also the children of the residents who live with you, of them you may buy, which is mashma, that there's a way in which one may purchase slaves from the people of Canaan. You would think that what would happen in a case where a Canaanite slave who engaged in relations with a maidservant from the other nations and the father or the son, are you permitted to buy this slave? And that's what the Torah says. Torah says, which you have begotten in your land. From those who you begotten in your land, and not from the Gainim in your land, whose fathers are from the Shiva Amamim. Now the Gemara discusses the second case of Rabbi Yechan's statement. If they converted, we'll go after the Pogam Shebishneim. So the Gemara says, B'mai. To which case are you referring to? If you say it's referring to an Egyptian who married an Armenis, my Pogamika. Why? It's not a Pogam, Armenis, which means that she may marry a Yid. Rather, we're talking about an Armenian man who married an Egyptian woman. Now, and in the case if the child is a male, cast him after his father and make him permanently usher from entering the congregation as an Armenian male. And if it's a female, cast her after the father, so that she's considered a second generation who may not marry a Yid. Okay, the Mishnah says, Kol sheyesh la alav Kidushin. Any case where a woman cannot join in Kidushin with him, but she can join in Kidushin with others, so we say the Vlad is a mamzer. He said this, and some determined or send the name of Rabbi Yanai. Or the pasuk says, it says, and she departs out of his house and goes and becomes another man. What does that teach us? She becomes a wife to others, but not to relatives. Kiddushin is forbidden. Kiddushin to forbidden relatives does not take effect. Maskla Rab Abbas, he asked him a shaila. Maybe another means another, but not to her husband's son. Kiddushin is ineffective only in the case of the Isser that makes the Beis Din give Kaddish, not one that the Beis Din, imposes a capital punishment, not Kaddish. So the Gemara says, Ben behediksiv. In regards to a son, it says clearly, Lo yikach ish es eshes aviv. It says a man shall not take his father's wife, which means that a Kiddushin is not effective in this situation. So, so why do I need to have the term acher? It must be that she may marry others but not relatives. But why don't you say that both psukim are referring to the son, and you shall say that one's lechatchila and one is the evet. If the son attempts to be mekadesh his father's wife, it means it's no consequence. So the Gemara asks that the lechatchila ma'achais isha nafka. The lechatchila we learn from the pasuk of achais isha. Or ma'achais isha bekadesh le'tasi b'kiddushin. If with regards to the isser of a wife's sister, it's with kares, she cannot be mekadesh. Chayav Mrs. Basin like kol shekain. So for sure chayav Mrs. Basin. So I don't need to have a pasuk lechatchila. So the Gemara says ve'ema idi v'idi b'achais isha. Why do I say that the pasuk is referring to achais isha and halachatchila hadayavit? So the Gemara says, you know what? You're right. You could have interpreted the pasuk that way. Achkechan achais isha. So you found a source to the wife's sister. Shara Reis Menayin. What do you know about the other Arayis? The Gemara says, Afinon ma'achais isha. I learned from achais isha. Ma'achais isha miyuchedes she'erva v'chayav v'nila zdenis kodesh v'ashigos echatas. Just like in regards to a wife's sister, Torah specified her, and she's forbidden relatives, and she's chayav kodesh if it's intentional. And if it's a sheigish, she has to bring a chatas. And Kiddushin is not tefis. Af kol she'erva v'chayav v'nila kodesh v'ashigos echatas l'tafsir b'Kiddushin. So too, any case where there's with the erva and Zdeni is Kodesh and Shigaz Yechatos Leitasi Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, "Bishlei mekula asyon." Okay, you found a makar to the rest of them, but al eishes ish ve'eishes och ikle mifrach. I could refute the kal v'chemer ve'eishes ish and eishes och. Malach es ish ken ein lo heter b'makom mitzvah. In the case of aches ish, there's no heter b'makom mitzvah. Tamer ve'eishes och sheish lo heter b'makom mitzvah. When it comes to a brother's wife, sometimes there's a heter b'makom mitzvah, even though they could not, in a regular case, get married. So the Gemara says, "Eishes ish nami ikle mifrach." You can also be peirech eishes ish. Ma'alahalach ken ein lo heter b'chaya oistern. There's no permitted during the lives of those when they're alive. Tamer ve'eishes ish sheish lo heter b'chaya oistern. Because she can get divorced. The pasuk says, Torah says, whoever shall do any of this as abomination shall be cut off. So the Torah is makish all the arayis d'aches isha. Makish isha le'tasi be'kedushin. Af kol arayis is also le'tasi be'kedushin. If so, if you're making such a learning, so the cheda afilu nida nami. So even if somebody gets married to Anida, also the child should be a mamzer. So the Gemara says, in these cases, if somebody has relations with Anida or a Seder, should have blood mamzer. Why not? Why is the child not a mamzer? So the pasuk says, utihi nidasa alav. The Torah says, and her nida shall be upon him, which we learn from here. Afilu b'shas nidasa, even b'shas nidasa, by her nida, tehei ba havaya, she should apply to her. The Gemara learns the connection between the terms havaya and havaya, as both share the same root, and therefore that's why the child is not a mamzer.